Hey guys, so welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm talking about Enneagram Basics and just kind of all the components that make up the Enneagram and that go into it. So if you've ever wondered what is the Enneagram, what goes into it, what is it made up of, or if you've heard buzzwords thrown around and you're like, what is that? And it has kind of confused you, this is a great video. It's just a one-stop shop of everything, all the components that make up the Enneagram or that go into it and what they are, and just a basic overview of absolutely everything. And then, so let's just go ahead and get into it. So in the last video, we talked about why self-awareness is important, and the reason that the Enneagram is important is because self-awareness is important. So the Enneagram is a tool that gives us our why, and that is so important because our why and our unconscious motivations and fears really drive us. So they control us, and if we don't become aware of them and we don't understand that, then we are led blindly by these things that drive us, which is sort of dangerous. We need to be able to understand who we are and why we do the things that we do so that we can take control of that and really lead our lives and make our lives what we want them to be. So that is why the Enneagram is important. It just gives us our why so that we can fix how we do things. It gives you your core fear and your core desire, and just what is inherently driving you. So that's an incredibly, that's essentially the main point of the Enneagram, is just it tells you why you do things and it helps you understand yourself in that way. That's the most important thing. If you get nothing else from the Enneagram, just understand your why, understand your core fear and your core motivation, and be aware of that. So second, what is the Enneagram? We talked about why it's important for self-awareness, and the Enneagram is just a personality tool that is used to give us the ability to know our why, like we just talked about a second ago. But it's unlike any other personality tool in that it is entirely based on those core fears and motivations, and it is not at all behavior-based. So most personality tools that you come across are like gift finders or something like that is going to be mostly based off of behavior. And that's great, and it's always good to learn about your behavior and places that you need to develop in that way, but it's less permanent and less effective than when you really get to the root of it and you pick apart why you act that way. So the Enneagram gives us our why, and then it helps us to get to the core of it rather than to just treat the behavior. And then it is based off of core fears and motivations. And so the structure of it, what you've probably heard the most about is the 9 base numbers. There's 1 through 9. But I'll get to that in a minute. So the stances is probably going to be the easiest to start with. And I'm going to make a separate video for all of the components of the Enneagram. This is just to kind of get it all into one place, and just to make it easier for you guys if you have just want to watch one video and know a general idea of what everything is. So the stances, first of all, this is going to be the easiest thing to help you narrow down your number, or to help you understand another person if they haven't taken the Enneagram or don't know their Enneagram. It's easier to say, I think this person is in the aggressive stance, or the compliant stance, or the withdrawn stance, rather than it is to say, this person is definitely a 1, or this person is definitely a 7, or whatever it may be. But, so there's 3 stances. There's aggressive, compliant, and withdrawn. So the aggressive stance says, I will overcome the world. The compliant stance says, I will come alongside the world. And the withdrawn stance says, I will withdraw from the world. And so the aggressive stance is made up of 3, 7, and 8. The compliant stance is 1, 2, and 6. And the withdrawn stance is 4, 5, and 9. So the aggressive stance essentially is just a more aggressive take on life. They're your go-getters, and they have a lot of energy. Compliant is going to come alongside people and is going to want to be part of a community, to better that community that they're in, and things like that. And then the withdrawn is they kind of withdraw from the world. They're a little bit checked out, and they do not fully engage with the world. So that's stances, and the reason that it's easier to start with stances than to go straight into base numbers is because it is a little bit more behavior, and it's a little bit easier to categorize and to be able to recognize that, because people will often mistype their base number because of their numbers being in the same stance. So there's one of each number or one of each triad in the different 3 stances. So triads, we'll get into that now, is your processing centers. And I touched on this a little bit in the last video. So your processing centers, there's head, heart, and gut. And head is the realm of thought, heart is the realm of emotion, and then gut is the realm of instinct. So gut is 8, 9, and 1. They all take information in through the gut as an instinct. So information hits them as an instinct, and they kind of immediately know if it's right or wrong. And then you have the heart triad, which is 2, 3, and 4, and they take information in through the heart as an emotion. So everything hits them as an emotion, and they kind of feel it first. It hits them emotionally first. And then you have the head triad, or the thought center, and it hits them as a thought first, and then so they think about it at first. So, and then the thing with triads, you take information in one of those places, and then you move it to another place, and that's kind of like your processing pattern. So this is super interesting to me. Triads is one of my favorite subjects of the Enneagram because it is so incredibly insightful in that I never realized, so I'm a 2, and 2s are heart-gut processors, so that means they take information in through the heart as an emotion, so it hits me as an emotion, and then since I move it to the gut, I immediately act on it. So gut, or like the body center, is like action, or like instinct. So I feel it and then I act on it. And this has been useful for me to know because before I knew that, I would feel things and then I would just act on them, and I would think that I was justified in that, or I would think that people would understand why I was, but I didn't even know what feeling I was acting off of because I didn't take the time to really fully like think about it and to feel and understand what that feeling was. It hit me as an emotion and then I immediately acted on it. So the thing with the processing centers and triads is it's so much easier to be able to recognize those patterns in yourself when you know what your processing pattern is, and to be able to develop the place that you may not be so strong in. So for me, it's been developing my thinking and being able to take a breath and really understand where my emotions are coming from, rather than just immediately acting off of that and then expecting people to know why I would react that way. Before I get into the 9 distinct types and the descriptions of them and their individual core fears and motivations of each 9 type, I want to talk about childhood wounds and just touch on that really quick. So childhood wounds sounds really big and scary, and you may be thinking, what the heck is a childhood wound? What are you saying about my parents? But childhood wound, it just talks about how we get our why. So we have our core fears and motivations, and they're distinct for each 9 type. And the reason that they're distinct for each 9 type is that each of the 9 types internalized a different childhood wounding message. And that doesn't mean that we all came from an abusive household and that our parents were terrible, though sometimes it is true that a certain type or person came from an abusive household with that message. But for the most part, it just is the best intentions that get skewed because we live in a broken world, and that's just how it is. People hurt people, and it's not intentional, and it doesn't always work out how we want it to. But that is just the fact of life, is that we live in a broken world, and even with the best intentions, things can happen. So the childhood wounds is just a message that we were either hearing or thought we were hearing that we internalized that bring us our core fear and motivation. So whatever that wounding message is that we internalized, it will bring a different core fear and motivation, and it's different for each of the 9 types. With that said, let's get into the base numbers. So type 8 is called the challenger, and their core fear is being controlled, being betrayed, being weak, and their core desire is of being in control, being autonomous, and being self-reliant. And so the core, or the childhood wound for 8 was usually that a parent or guardian may have betrayed them in some way, or they felt controlled by a parent or guardian, and so then they felt like they had to protect themselves, and they felt like they had to be the one to stand up for themselves because maybe that other person wouldn't. So 8s tend to be domineering, they are incredibly confident, and they have very heavy appetites for life in general. They are very strong in their literal physical strength, also in just their presence is very weighty and heavy and passionate. 8s are incredibly passionate, and they often say, you know, other people may talk to an 8 and say, why are you yelling at me, or why are you so angry with me? And they're like, I'm not angry, I'm just passionate. And so 8s just have this appetite and passion and excitement and zeal for life and for what they think is right and wrong, and they will act on it. And they are in the gut triad, because we're starting with the gut triad, and they are gut processors. So everything enters, all of their information enters them as an instinct, and then they immediately act on it. And this makes a lot of sense, because if they don't stop to feel it and they don't stop to think about it, it would make sense that they have a very strong and boisterous and out there, unapologetically presence. So 8s are often also very misunderstood, and I have a very special part in my heart for 8s. I just think that they're incredibly bold and strong, and I have a ton of respect for them. So 8s, the challenger. So then we move on to 9, and 9 is called the peacemaker, which is very much the opposite of 8, though they do share some certain characteristics. For instance, they are both in the gut triad. So 9s take information in through the gut, they know if it's right or wrong, hits them as an instinct, and then they bring it up to their heart and they feel about it. So they feel, and they often don't feel in touch with their instincts because they are a little bit more out of touch with that. So 9s are motivated, or they fear disconnection, or that they are secondary. So they fear that essentially, like, they won't be chosen and that they are sort of forgettable almost. So they try and connect and enmesh and merge with other people so that they can be with them, and so that they will not be disconnected. And they desire peace and inner stability. So they essentially feel like they want peace. And like, if you've met a 9, they have a very interesting specific quality about them. It's just they bring peace, and it's like this blanket of calm and of comfort that is around them. So it's very distinct for 9s. So 9s tend to be very quiet, and they can be very peaceful and sweet. They are often very others focused, because 9s are essentially asleep to how they feel, how they think, what they are, and like this is a very sad reality for 9s, because they are just very unaware of themselves, and it's very hard for 9s to become self-aware because they are essentially so much more connected to everybody else except for themselves. In the book Road Back to You, they put it as like 9 is at the apex of the Enneagram diagram, and they have a bird's eye view of every single number. And so 9s essentially can relate to every single number except for 9, because 9s have, they think that they have a very mild or forgettable or insignificant presence, but they are some of the best people in the entire world. So 9's the peacemaker. And then 1, moving on in the gut triad, 1 is called the reformer. So 1s fear that they are bad or defective, and they fear that there's just something inherently wrong with them, and that there's something inherently defective in them, and so they are intensely hypercritical of themselves, and they have what's called the inner critic. So the inner critic is essentially an incredibly high standard and very specific standard of how they should be, and that is just blatantly like cruel to them when they do not meet that standard. And nobody can be perfect, and occasionally the 1 is called the perfectionist, but 1s strive as close to perfection as they possibly can, and then beat themselves up when they can't meet that, which is impossible to meet because, like I said earlier, we live in an imperfect world. And then the 1's desire is to be good, to have integrity, and to be effective. So ones essentially just want the world to meet this ideal of how things should be. They are very much idealists in that way, and they want to reform everybody to come to that perfect ideal that they've come to. And ones tend to be very practical, but also incredibly idealistic. They want things to be this certain standard that they've placed for themselves, and that can make them critical of others. However, ones are worlds more critical of themselves than they are for others. So ones can be critical, they can be very particular, they're very structured, and they're very good at being able to come up with what might be right, or they're very good at reforming things to be that closer to that ideal. They're innovative, and they are very good at spotting like details, so they're very detail oriented, and they are fantastic to have in like manager positions and to be able to take on good things that need good management. They're very reliable, and they are very opinionated often, and very fun to be around though. So moving on to the heart triad is starting with 2. So 2 is called the helper, and they fear rejection and they fear being unlovable or unwanted. So they fear that if they do not connect with other people and they do not present themselves as helpful and lovable and kind of prove that they are helpful and lovable, then they will not be loved. So they will insert themselves into people's lives, and they will essentially try to be like desirable to other people in order to be seen as lovable or wanted or helpful, and to avoid rejection. And then their desire is to be loved and wanted. So the 2 essentially believes that they are inherently unlovable, and that they have to do things to help others and to love. They essentially have to love others in order to be loved, or at least that's what they believe. So if they are not the object of, like, if they are not loving somebody else, they find it very hard to be accepting of themselves and to be seen in their own eyes and in the eyes of others as valuable. Because if they don't see themselves as valuable, if they're not helping somebody, then they project that onto other people and say, well, I'm not helping anybody, and I'm not being I'm not lovable, so they must not love me. So this can be difficult for people that love 2s, because the fact is that you're not always going to be needed as a 2, and so that can be very hard for 2s to grasp onto, because they essentially equate being needed and being indispensable as being loved. But the fact is that you don't always have to be needed in order to be wanted. So that's why being unwanted is their fear rather than being unneeded. So 2s are lovable, and they are lovable, and they're sweet, and they will want to be helpful, and they're very practical lovers. And when you tell them what you need from them, they are of course like willing to jump in and to love you and to be helpful in that way. They are very people oriented, and so they can be very relational. In jobs, they want to talk to people and get to know people and build a community that is very loving and impactful. So that's 2's, the helper. And then moving on to 3, which is called the achiever or the performer. So 3s fear that they are inherently worthless or valueless, and they desire to have worth inherently and to bring value. So a lot of people think that 3s are motivated by success, and this is completely not true. 3s are not motivated by success, but success is a very good, what they would say, one of their favorite words is like measurable way of equating or understanding their value. So if they are successful, they equate that to value or to worth. So the reason that you see 3s in places where they can climb the ladder or where they are in charge of something very successful is because they equate they often equate success to value. But it's just a measurable way of seeing their value and the worth that they bring. So 3s desire to be inherently valuable and to be able to bring value to the world. So one thing that I've told my boyfriend Trey is a 3, and I've told him before, is that if you believe and internalize that you inherently are valuable, you will then in turn pour out value. But 3s will often switch that and say that they have to earn their value instead of just having it. So 3s have a hard time accepting that they are inherently valuable, and so they want to try and earn it through achievements, through whatever that may be. So 3s are often incredibly driven. They are very practical people, and like practical on a whole different level kind of people. Like they will be able to have this big, huge goal and then break it down into little steps and just go through the process. So 1s and 3s can look similar because they are both very practical and very good at systemizing, but 3s are more flexible and worlds more practical rather than idealistic. So if a 3 sets a goal, they're going to get to that goal by any means necessary, which can be a very good thing and also a very bad thing depending on the level of health for the 3. And sometimes it can be ineffective. But 3s are very driven, very good at setting goals and reaching them. They're incredibly practical. They're also very relational, and they're very good at making connections. So they're the people that are like walking into a room and talking to everybody and being able to, they're usually saying like, I know a guy and things like that. But 3s are very loving. They're also in the heart triad. They are heart-head processors, so they take emotion that they take in and they chuck it to the wall and then immediately think about it. So they are, they often see themselves as incredibly pragmatic and like cerebral, but they initially take things into the heart, which is sometimes hard for 3s to grasp. But 3s have a different level of inspiration to them that is just insane. They're, for sure, the gift for 3s is just being incredibly inspiring and getting people fired up and believing in themselves to be able to achieve what they want. So moving on, that is the achiever, 3. And then 4, called the individualist. So the next concept I want to talk about that goes into the Enneagram is growth and stress numbers, or growth and stress arrows. So the growth and stress numbers, there is a little bit of like a misconception around it. So you can like have a stressed out day or like act out of stress, and that is like you take on the negative traits of your stress number. And then there's like seasons of stress, and in seasons of stress, when you're going through like a trial, you can kind of choose to instead like make it a season of growth and like tap into the characteristics of your growth number and apply it to the stressful situation and compose yourself in a way that will make it a season of growth, rather than like it just being kind of your default, like I just act this way because this is who I am kind of thing. So that's the nice thing about the growth and stress numbers is, and like the Enneagram in general, is that we can, instead of just acting off of autopilot in those seasons of stress and like falling into bad behaviors, we can look at ourselves, slow down, and look at what we need to add to our lives and to how we work in order to make it a season of stress or of growth rather than just a negative season. So growth and stress numbers, what the concept of it is so you have your base number and you are your base number and those core fear motivations, but then in stress you take on the negative traits of your stress number and you look like that number in that way, and like it's because you go to your stress number because you aren't getting your needs met and you are like trying to essentially kind of grasp for them. So then you take on the traits of that number that you think will help you gain those needs, or like avoid that fear. So you go to stress because you feel like you're not getting your needs, or you are facing essentially that core fear, and so you're grasping to be able to meet those needs with the methodology of that number that is your stress number. And then in seasons of growth, what the season of growth means is like essentially tapping into the characteristics of your growth number and applying it to yourself and being able to become a little bit more whole with the characteristics that you are lacking. So let's get into what that is for each number. I'm again going by Triad, so gut, heart, and then head. So starting with 8, the challenger, in stress they go to 5. So the normally very loud and opinionated and in-your-face 8 is going to retreat internally as a method of protecting themselves. So if an 8 feels like it is being controlled or betrayed, then they're going to retreat into who they can trust, and they feel like they can only trust themselves, and they are autonomous, and so they will retreat inward like a 5 would. So they will retreat inward in seasons of stress or in times of stress, and that is when they go to 5. So then in seasons of growth, a thing that they can tap into as an 8 is to go to 2. So 2s are very vulnerable and open with their emotions, and they're very giving. So rather than being autonomous, an 8 is going to be more willing to have a community and people that they love, and to be more vulnerable with how they feel with those specific people. So the type 4 is like your incredibly dynamic, so they're heart processors, first of all. So they take everything in as an emotion, and then they feel about it more, and they are just incredibly deep, dynamic, complex individuals. And they're so, since they like feel and then they feel more, they're incredibly attuned to their own emotions and to the emotions of others, which can make them incredibly empathetic to other people. And they're very introspective and self-aware in that way, and that they just like they are very attuned to how they feel, and then they want to express how they feel. So their core fear is that they have no significance or belonging, and belonging and significance are incredibly meaningful to 4s, and they want to be able to have a unique and impactful and significant identity, and so they will do that sometimes by being unique, and they will be outwardly unique, and then it's kind of like a catch-22 for them, because they're super unique and like a little bit, you know, like they will call themselves maybe odd, but they also want belonging. So they want to belong, and they want to fit in, and they want to be like everybody else, but also they don't want that at all. So 4's desire is authenticity, freedom to express themselves, and finding their purpose. So finding where they fit and where they belong, and like feeling, they can have this sense of like longing to them, and they feel like they're missing something, and that everybody else has this thing, but that they're just missing this one thing that would make them happy forever, and that would make them feel like they're not missing that key element to life. So 4s are incredibly like artistic. They're your artists, your poets, your music like writers. They have like aesthetics to them, and they like to find beauty in the world, and they find beauty in like the ordinary, and they'll find just like beauty wherever they can find it, and they bring that out in the world in a very unique and beautiful way, and they want to express that, and they want to share that, and often they want very special, intimate relationships so that they can share everything that they feel and everything that they know and see, and like their point of view from that unique and beautiful standpoint. So we need 4s just because they add so much dynamic emotion and beauty and understanding of the world, and just like they can see everything through this completely unreal lens that yeah, so 4s, incredibly dynamic, beautiful people. So moving on to the head triad, we have 5, and 5 is called the observer or the investigator, and I love the word observer for them because they are very much, they love to observe because they love to gain knowledge. And so the core fear for 5 is being incapable, or feeling like they are not prepared for the world, or like that they don't have what it takes. And so 5, they are they're head gut processors, and this is what that means. So for 5s, they take information in through the head, and then they will act it out in a way of like they will go gain the knowledge, and they will go practice the ability, but they do it in a way that is not participatory. So they don't participate and they don't engage with the world they are essentially trying to gain as much as they can and to understand as much as they can so that maybe if they wanted to, they could go and participate in the world. But they don't feel like they can participate because they don't have what it takes. So rather than that taking action, that moving from head to gut and acting, not in a way that is engaging with the world, but in a way that is practicing or like trying to essentially gain. So 5s are motivated, or they desire competency and to lack no knowledge or ability. So they want to be prepared and they want to feel like they are capable of handling the world because they inherently feel like they don't have what it takes. But 5s, they bring this wisdom to the world that is like so still and so quiet and so steady, and they want to be able to share that wisdom with people. And when they're in a healthy place, they make the most amazing teachers because they just have this desire to gain knowledge and to understand. And like when problems arise, they are almost not motivated to solve the problem because they just want to pick it apart and they want to understand it. Like that's a great way of like understanding what a 5 really is they just want to understand and they want to be able to pick things apart, see how it works, and then put it back together. So they're very, they just are incredibly wise and bring a whole different level of like objectivity and wisdom to the world that we definitely need. So moving on, in the head triad is 6s. So 6s are head processors, which if that sounds like it would be very anxiety inducing, it is. And so 6s make up around approximately, like it's guessed to be about 60% of the population. So there's a ton of 6s out there, but it's definitely not like there's like carbon copies of like 60% of the world is exactly the same. 6s are actually like the most diverse number because there's so much that goes into 6s. They're incredibly dynamic. So there's a lot of them, but they're so different from 6 to 6. Like case by case, they look very different a lot of the time. And so that can make typing for 6s very difficult. But 6s' fear is being without security, support, or guidance. And then their desire is to have security, support, and guidance, and to be essentially safe and not have to worry about anything. So 6s are so anxious and they just desire a world and an environment and a community where all of their anxieties can be essentially null. So they don't have anything to worry about. But obviously we live in a very broken world where there is a lot to worry about a lot of the time. And so 6s can have a very hard time with that anxiety. So 6s are going to be your dad who always makes sure the water heater is working during the winter, and he's going to be like the person that is always preparing for the apocalypse. My dad did that for forever. Ever since I was a kid, he's always prepared for whatever apocalypse in case the world ends. And then he had a heyday with the pandemic. But 6s are like incredibly funny because a cool thing they have is a level of humor about them. If they don't since they're so aware of everything that could go wrong, they can kind of poke fun at it, and it kind of takes the fear off of, it kind of takes the seriousness away from the fear, and they can kind of just be able to live with it essentially. So 6s are very witty and very wry a lot of the time, and they're incredibly loyal friends. My best friend and I, we've been friends for 14 years, and she's a 6. So they make the most amazing friends and incredibly dependable family members, and they're really just the glue of the communities because they're the people that show up to every meeting, and they're called the loyalist for a reason, you know? So 6s are incredibly dynamic. They can look very different from 6 to 6, but the common consensus is that they're motivated by security, and that they can be incredibly skeptical, and that they have to be able to trust whatever they are participating in. And so there's phobic and counterphobic 6s, which is kind of different from all the other numbers. So phobic 6s essentially want authority. They want to be under the umbrella of somebody's authority, and they want to be able to have the responsibility mostly on that authority figure, and to be able to just show up and have that kind of comfort and that security in that. And then there's 6s who are very skeptical of authority. Rather than trusting in authority, they challenge the authority, and they essentially kind of try to see what their limits are, and they essentially can kind of think that all authority is like corrupt and bad, and they don't trust it. So phobic and counterphobic sixes can look very different. Phobic sixes can sometimes look like 1s or 2s, and counterphobic can sometimes look like 8s or 1s. So the 6s in the world can sometimes have a hard time typing because of this dynamicness of the 6. So 6s, the loyal, amazing friends, skeptical, and have a hard time trusting. But they're definitely the glue that holds the world together. So lastly, we have 7s, and 7s are called the enthusiast. So 7s are core fear is pain or being deprived, and then their core motivation is a lot of people will think that it's freedom, but the core desire for 7s really is to be fully satisfied and content, and to lack nothing in that way. So they really just want satisfaction. So 7s, a big reason people can think that their motivation is freedom is because 7s want to be free of pain. They don't like being in pain. They don't like sitting in yucky emotions and being bogged down by life. They want to be free of those chains, and they want to be able to go enjoy themselves and to be able to go have pleasant, fulfilling experiences in that way. The problem with this is that since they can't stay in negative emotions, they can't fully stay in positive ones, and like they're always kind of flying by the seat of their pants, and they don't quite become satisfied with those interactions that they try to have, because they're more of a fleeting fun than they are fulfilling. So 7s, although they desire freedom in kind of a fleeting sense, they are more looking just to be satisfied fully, and so that they don't mind sitting in those negative emotions quite as much. So that's all of the core numbers, all of their core fears and motivations, and kind of what that ends up looking like in those numbers, or like generally what the behavior will look like. Because although the Enneagram is not built off of behavior, it's built off of core fears and motivations, the behavior of each type can be very accurate because it comes from those core fears and motivations, and it kind of is like, that's the root, but then the plant is the behavior. So our behaviors can stem from those core fears and motivations, and that's why we can tend to look like our number, and usually do, is because of where it's stemming from. So those are the core numbers. They all bring different facets of the world that are just so needed, and it makes us complete. And like in The Road Back to You, he talks about how the 9 numbers are just 9 different facets of God's character, and how we all bring something beautiful and dynamic and different to the world, and how we all fall short, and like that's just how the world is. We're just broken, and God encompasses all of these traits and all of these beautiful things into a perfect way. So now let's talk about wings. So the concept of wings is you have your base number, and then wings is the numbers on either side of your base number. So a 5 can either have a 6 wing or a 4 wing, and an 8 can have either a 9 wing or a 7 wing. A 1 can have either a 9 wing, because 9 is on the other side of 1, and vice versa, or they can have a 2 wing. So all wings are really is they just kind of add flavor and a little bit more of like a dynamic spice to your personality. So they just add like different facets to your personality and like your behavior, and you just kind of take on traits of your wing number, but you don't share the core motivation or fear from that number as much. So you are your core number, you have those core fears and motivations, but then you can have characteristics from your wing number. You can even look like almost entirely like your wing number, but still completely identify with the core fear and motivation and be that number of your base number. So like you usually have a dominant wing and a non-dominant wing. And the dominant wing is just like what you draw from the most, but I personally believe that you pull from both of them, like you pull from both of them, but you have one that's dominant. And then there are cases where you have either no wing at all, and that's what we call like 9 wing 9 or 2 wing 2, things like that. So you can have either no wing at all, you can have even wings, and you pull from them equally. But usually there's a dominant wing and a non-dominant wing. And the cool thing about wings is, like, if you have characteristics from your naturally dominant wing and there's characteristics from your non-dominant wing that you want to develop, you can definitely do that and like purposefully kind of pull from that. But it can be a little bit harder to tap into than your dominant wing. So wings, not as important as, obviously, like, definitely not as important as the core part of the Enneagram and like paying attention to the core fears and motivations, but they definitely do help to describe more of like the characteristics that we might have, and to be able to kind of create a fuller picture of our personalities. So then the last couple things I want to touch on before I wrap up this video is the concepts of subtypes and tritypes in the Enneagram. So these are some of the more complex, in-depth subjects in the Enneagram, and they're definitely better for when you already have your core type nailed down and you're already very confident in like understanding your type and how you're going to use those basic concepts to grow. And this is definitely for more when you're like able to dig deep and not get super confused by it, and you're very clear on some of those other concepts first. But once you are ready for like subtypes and tritypes, they are incredibly insightful and really just like fun and interesting to learn about. So we'll start with subtypes. So there's 3 subtypes, and subtypes work in descending order. So you use one, you have a dominant subtype, or I like to call them instinctual variants. So you have your dominant one, and then your next one, and then your next one. So you have a dominant subtype, but then you use them in descending order. So you have all 3 and you use all 3, but you use them one first, and then the other ones are a little bit weaker. So instinctual variants, we all have them, so it's less exclusive to like a certain number, whereas like these other subjects we've talked about have been like very number specific, and they definitely look different on each number, but we all have these instinctual variants. So it's the subtypes is just kind of how you interact with the world. So it's like your instincts, what you see and what you notice and what you look for when you walk into a room. So the 3 subtypes or instinctual variants is self-preservation. So self-preservation subtypes are going to be concerned with practical needs and needs for self-preservation. So things like food, financial security, shelter, water, where the emergency exits are even, finding their friends, having like a good solid community and a support system. And they walk into a room and they look for, like, is this a safe place? Where are my specific friends? What time do I have to leave to go get enough sleep for the next day? And things like that. So then there's social subtype, and social subtypes are concerned with people in the context of the whole group or of the world at large. So rather than like concerned about their own personal like self-preservation needs, they are more concerned with like having open arms, getting to know lots of people, having lots of friends, having a big community that gets along really well. And so they will like organize the parties, and they walk into a room and they look for the people that they want to talk to, and they usually want to talk to everybody and just like have good interactions, and they want to be able to kind of just like they're concerned with people in the context of a whole group and having open arms and having a good community. So open arms for socials. And then the sexual or one-to-one subtype is concerned with what is the most intense and passionate and meaningful interaction I can have. So they are concerned with meaningful and just like sexual is the word that they use because that is like a very good way of putting it. It's just intense and passionate. And it doesn't mean like literally sexual, like it doesn't mean like promiscuous, and it doesn't mean that they are more immodest or anything like that. It just means that they are concerned with personal, intense, and intimate one-to-one relationships with people. That's why they're also called intimate or one-to-one. But sexual is really like the best word to fully encompass how they interact with the world. So sexual subtypes walk into a room and they look for the thing or the person or the experience that will produce the most intense meaning and the most intense, like, memorable kind of experience in that way. Is like they want something that is just intense and passionate, and the best word for that is like sexual, I guess. I didn't make it up, but so they walk into a room, they're often very concerned with finding like their person and having deep relationships like that. They prefer one-on-one environments opposed to social, who has like very open arms and will prefer more of a community environment. So that's kind of just the overview of subtypes. Pretty useful for things that I won't really get into now, but I'm definitely going to create a video on them at some point because it is a very interesting dynamic of the Enneagram. So after subtypes, we're going to talk about tritypes, and this is probably my favorite of the Enneagram subjects, but it is not talked about hardly at all. It's a very underrepresented or known, really. It's very it's not very talked about. So tritypes is this idea of, so if you've ever thought like, I am this and I relate to the core number of this type, but then I also really identify with this one, but this one's just stronger kind of thing, or like I have a lot of these characteristics of this type, then that number may be in your tritype. So tritypes work like this. So you have your base number, and you are your base number, and you have the needs of your base number, whatever that is. But then you work in descending order, kind of like the subtypes. It works in descending order of how you go about meeting those needs. So your base number will try to meet the needs of that number, of what your core fear and desire is, by whatever your base number does. But then if that doesn't really work, it'll move on to the next number in this descending order that will be in a different triad. So if you're a 6, then you could move into the heart triad and try and meet your needs of a 6 by using the methodology of 2. So 6, you're trying to meet that security need, and you do it by how 6s do it, but then you move to 2. And then if it doesn't work in the methodology that a 2 might use to meet those needs, you would go to, let's say, 9, which is in the gut triad. So it goes from head, which is what the triad that 6 is in, to heart, which is what 2 is in, to 9. And then all of that together would be kind of how you try and meet the needs of that 6. It can also be how the process that you use to process a problem or emotions or thoughts. So it can be like a problem that you face, you're trying to meet the needs of your number, and you move in descending order in those in this tritype. And then it can also be kind of just, you've solved the problem with however you did it, but then you're processing it, and that's how you kind of fully encompass that processing process, which is confusing to say. But so for me, I'm a 2-9-6. So I have the needs of a 2, and I try and meet those needs how a 2 meets those needs, obviously first. And then I will move to 9, which could be meaning being very peacemaking, very detached, or moving towards people in a non-confrontational way. And then if that doesn't work to meet the needs, I could move into 6 and be like hyper loyal, and I could become very anxious and overthinking about it, get more pragmatic, and maybe be a little bit more skeptical of people. And then also, if I meet the needs, it could just be encompassing all of that problem, whatever it was, and processing it through that, and then kind of coming to a conclusion internally. So it doesn't always mean like external, you always like handle a problem in this descending order. It could just mean that you solve the problem in whatever place you did in the tritype, and then you kind of process it emotionally in that way, in that descending order. So tritypes are very confusing, but they're very useful for recognizing patterns and being able to know how to give yourself the proper time and space to handle and understand problems and what you need during that process. So very confusing. I'm definitely making a video about tritypes because they are so useful and so interesting and just under like represented, like definitely needs to be talked about way more. So I hope you guys have liked this video. I know it's super long, but I hope it was really informational for you and that I hopefully hit all of the boxes in Enneagram that you were maybe confused about or weren't quite sure what exactly it even was. So if that has been helpful, I hope that you can kind of like look back at this and go back to this as a reference. If you guys have any questions, I would love to hear them. And yeah, I hope you guys like this video. Like and subscribe for more Enneagram and self-awareness content. And yeah, thanks guys.